Hey, how's it going? My dog thought I was talking to him. Um, yeah, so super happy that I'm enjoying uh, doing these videos, and I I just have been getting a lot of value from talking this stuff out publicly, and then being able to rewatch myself and just gain a little bit of feedback. I'm, as simple as hearing myself kind of mumble certain syllables and things like that. So, one of the big things that I've been really wanting to talk more about is goddess culture, um, especially as the rise of AI and the tech oligarchs and um, the way that social media, including this platform, are kind of pulling us away from what's real, which is to say, like our ecosystems, our social connection points, and where we find ourselves kind of in the world right now. I've been really contemplating, like, how do I discuss this? And so this is one of like the big topics that I want to talk about a lot more. Uh, and yeah, so here we go. So, goddess culture is something that I have been very resistant to proselytizing. It's something that I have been holding for a while, just through this framework of I'm the only representative I can have of that, and so I'm going to personally just represent that wherever I go and in my personal relationships. And I'm into that, like that's a cool framework for me to live my life from. It's affected my personal relationships quite a bit, and I'm happy with that. That if that's all goddess culture ever ends up being in my life, um, then that's cool. I'm fine with that. My dog and my spouse and my relationship to myself and um, the immediate relations I have around me are enriched by that, and that's cool. But the big thing that I see goddess culture as like a topic of discussion being about is to what extent are humans in this moment in historical time and our moment in reality, how much are we going to give up our framing of reality to these tech oligarchs? How much of the transhumanist, the you know the AI merged reality are we going to really, like, how much are we just going to give up that space of culture, of the framing of culture? I think we long ago, we're talking 40s, 50s, 60s, as a culture in America, kind of gave ourselves over to the capitalist means of production of media and of the cultural production sector. And I think that has drawn us in an anti-human way, kind of all along, right? There was like a mechanization and a dehumanization that was occurring kind of all through that process that I don't think the general culture was super aware of. But as we watch these kind of like decades, even if we just use like the decade markers of like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, the 2010s, um, we can see where we got now. which is to say that everything that you see on the movie screens is soulless, is, smooth. um, we don't use squibs. It's all computer animated. There's nothing visceral kind of unfolding there, because all the stories have been kind of told, and all the, it's just this kind of regurgitated streaming slop. Enshittification is the framework that I think a lot of people are using to talk about, the way that our media is just slopified. It's all just content being thrown out there. It's very dehumanizing. It's very depersonalizing. It's very disconnecting. And that's fine. If that's what we want to do, if that's how the human species wants to engage going forward, it's not on me to tell anybody to do something different. That's fine. But the goddess culture is not about that, is specifically not about that. But I don't think that there's an easy transition to be made there, right? Just like all kind of cultural transitionary moments. I don't think that there's like a quick, easy, we didn't wake up one day and then we were in the capitalist mode of production, right? There was, the 30 Years' War. There was all of these extended historical conflicts that unfolded in order to get to these new phases of production. And, we can say, how did we arrive at the slop phase? We can see that we arrived here. So, nothing's going to happen immediately. Nothing's going to happen overnight. But there is this framework of, as media, as culture is created by humans, consumed by humans, the machines are going to continue to get better at watching our material and then replicating it and feeding it back to us in this kind of loop of, we've figured out what you dum-dums like, and so we can just mechanize that. We can dehumanize that. And that is, it feels like a bummer to me. And as I deepen my relationship to the goddess more and more through my ritual cycles of the year, my life is kind of made up of seasonal rites, lunar celebrations, of the cycles of the moon and the sun, essentially, is all we're talking about. And the way that connects us to nature, and ideally our relations, and at the most personal level, just our physical bodies, and what shifts, what changes, what moves. And, it feels like in a lot of ways the goddess culture is built around this complex framework for me of, the way I received it once, the way she kind of framed it was, what is it that you do? Who is it that you are beyond professionalism? When you step beyond that framework of like, I'm a professional and I do a job and I get paid and and millions of people will watch my creation, and the way that builds this sort of like externalized validation seeking feedback loop, and the way that really welcomes us into kind of like a grandiosity that is like always seeking something from outside of us to give us what we need to keep going, because all of our motivations are external, extrinsic, as opposed to intrinsically motivated, right? And this is like an intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated cultural milieu and cultural locus of motivation, for me, is like That's the primary shift that unfolds when we jump into the goddess culture, away from, we'll say, the hierarchical, pyramid oriented culture. When we enter into the goddess culture, we're talking much more circular is the image. It's a circle culture. It's a sitting in the circle and a listening and a receiving and a sharing but not sharing from like, I want to take the space, I want to be the center of attention, but sharing as in like, for me, the way that it's best said is the way of counsel, be lean of expression. Only say that which is necessary to say. Only speak that which is moving through you, right? Because someone else might be in the speaking chair, and I actually might be better served listening in this cultural framework. That listening, not taking the space, not dominating attention, not saying, pay attention to me, is actually what might be serving you if that's what the guidance is for you to engage with. And that's what's so exciting to me, is that both the speaker and the listener are active roles. These are things that have existed, right? I'm not saying anything new necessarily, but for me, there's a constellation that we can create that allows our personal and interpersonal relations to become something fundamentally different. That my value is not made up entirely of my ability to actively speak, to make something at you, but actually one of the most important active roles is my ability to receive, my ability to take in fully, to be moved by what's coming in to the framework. I think that for me is like one of the most exciting aspects of living in this different way. And through living in that different way, things, I find, at least for me, become so much more alive, so much more activated by that way of engagement. A conversation is not mechanized, right? It's not about influence. It's not about management. It's not about control. It's not about domination. It's not about my influence, my agenda. It's not about any of that. It's about noticing what's there. It's about how much can I see? How much can I hear? What's really being communicated by this person sitting in front of me or sitting in the circle with me? What is it that we're all speaking to? And this is like fundamentally for me where the shift happens. Up until there, it's all just theoretical stuff. It's all just modalities. Is one of the big things that I, have found myself in conversation with other humans about over these last 5 years or so. What do I mean by that? I'll extend that conversation out just a minute, right? Which is just to say that, so I've found myself really looking for circles to sit in, because I have believed that, at least my sense is that the temple of the goddess could not be created by me, right? The temple of the goddess is not about me. I have nothing to do with it, in fact. If I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, the temple of the goddess is still being created, as long as there are those who are coming and sitting in circle together. And the way that we hold ourselves as listeners and speakers and present even when we're not present, and that the conversation is happening even when the words are not being spoken, and that words don't need to be spoken for a conversation to unfold, to occur. And that for me is like, that's the fundamental reality. But a lot of the people who I have come into circle with, and this was such a foundational framework for the last 5 years, was just like everybody who was sitting in circle was using, and not everybody, obviously, I'm not trying to paint with too broad a brush or disparage, but so many people were like, this is the technique I use to sit in a circle, or this is the, this is the branding I'm using, or this is what it's all this mechanism of control and intellectual property, and look at how good I am at sitting in this circle and listening and talking. And the way that can be a virtue signal all on its own, but it's not sincere. Somebody was saying to me, I'm too sincere for the internet, about me, right? Saying to me that fundamentally, like, and it's the reason that I'm not on any social media platforms, is just like, I'm, irony and making fun of other people and all of this sort of stuff, like, genuinely, physically at this point, hurts me. The way that we just kind of like flippantly, ironically poke at people just hurts my soul, hurts my physical body to be around, which is fine. It's not on anybody else to adjust themselves to my preferences. It's just on me to know that about myself. And so I think that was really like where I gave up this idea of trying to engage in discourse, and where this like true kind of split unfolded in my being of, yeah, this is fun. I'm talking about a different culture here. I'm talking about creating a different culture here. And that's what this channel is really about for me, the experiment of creating a different culture. And that culture starts with my relationship to myself. That culture starts with my relating to myself. Like in the workplace, I always joke with people, I'm very forgiving of others because I'm very forgiving of myself. I don't really beat myself up about stuff anymore. I used to when I was younger, and I had a lot of external voices in my head about this, that, or the other. This is the way it's supposed to be. You gotta, whatever narratives are being kind of pressed into your subconscious. But I don't do that anymore. I don't feel that anymore. And so I certainly would never want to impose that on somebody else, but they're extremely useful means of control and domination, mechanization, dehumanization, that I think at least unfold in a very organic way, just kind of around this, like, how is it that we are really in relationship? How is it that we're really in relations? And I found that to be really exciting for me to say, like, oh yeah, I'm just having I'm just living in a different culture, and letting myself just step away from the dominant culture and say, like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool that that's the way your culture unfolds. That's not the way my culture unfolds. And to just let that be where I could rest, to just let that be where I could come to a certain amount of peace inside of myself. Because I don't need to be anything for anyone. I don't need to, make memes, and post them on the internet, which I'm so grateful that I never filled my head with that space. It just never happened. I never got into it. I was living in China when Facebook came out, right? I was training martial arts out in the middle of fucking nowhere in the mountains. And I remember watching these cultures kind of begin to form. And I've felt very outside of it ever since, which is, it's it's why I'll never be a drop ship billionaire. It's just not my scene, baby. Uh, but I am very much unequivocally, unironically, unmemified, kind of living in a way that is primarily related to and relating to the cycles of nature, the cycles of my relations, um, and the natural ebb and flow of the space I need, my partner needs. Does my dog need to go for a walk right now? Or actually, does my dog need to go for a walk in 45 minutes, but it's not really convenient for me to do it in 45 minutes? How do I engage in that? Debate with myself, with my schedule? How do I slow myself down a little bit more? How do I take a little bit more time to be present in this moment? How do I live with a little bit more gratitude? How do I live with a little bit more embodiment? How can I express myself more effectively to someone who might not be hearing me? How can I listen better to the people around me? How can I make the circle safer for more people, for everyone to be inside of? That those questions for me are the fundamental reality that I'm engaging in. It's not a modality. It's not a technique that I learned. It's a way that I live. I believe that every person, every non human person or human person, is just as worthy of the space to speak as me, educated or uneducated. Holding mastery or not holding mastery does not matter. Of course, if we're having a conversation where subject matter expertise is required, we defer to expertise. Of course, we listen to somebody who has something really valid to share, something that's really important for us all to hear, so that we can get an informed perspective on it. But then other times, where we're very connective, where we're very much just in a relational space, it's extremely important for everybody to feel like they have the same space in the circle to share, and that they're just as worthy as the master, whoever the hell that is, whatever the hell that means. There was a guy who was really into Buddhism, who was also a social worker, the Reverend Doctor. And he said this thing that I both agree and disagree with, right? Which was, wisdom is not egalitarian. Not everyone has developed the same wisdom. And I sat with that for a while. I sat with that for quite a while. And I loved that in one direction, right? Which is the acknowledgement of, wisdom is not egalitarian. Some people have lived longer. Some people have had different experiences. Some people have developed certain types of wisdom and others haven't. Hey, buddy, how you doing? And also, everyone has access to a certain wisdom. Everyone has access to a type of wisdom that I don't maybe necessarily have. I certainly don't have your experiences. I certainly don't have your understanding of your life, your reality. And so because of that, I fundamentally gain by including you. I fundamentally gain by listening to someone else. I'm fundamentally richer for understanding somebody else's perspective. Even if it's bonkers, based on falsehood, based on nonsense. I believe that in this culture of the circle, this culture of spaciousness, this culture of listening, that I have an opportunity, and I've done this. If someone is maybe not experiencing reality the way that I am, let's just use the idea of a schizophrenic person or someone who is maybe not experiencing reality the same way as me from a biochemical standpoint. My ability to listen to them is actually an enriching experience. It fundamentally pulls me out of the main character syndrome. It pulls me out of the consensus reality framework. It reminds me that other people are experiencing this reality in a way that is not the same as me, which for me, like, opens the world, opens the universal aperture so much. I love listening to conspiracy theorists. I love listening to people who are like super into astrology and all that sort of stuff. Not because I hook, line, and sinker believe everything they have to say. In fact, I certainly, in many of those instances, I'm like, this is nonsense what you're talking about, but it's entertaining nonsense that I can personally appreciate for any number of different ways. Um, Even if it's only for me to clarify what I don't agree with, even if it's just there for me to be able to say, like, interesting. I hear what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying. As long as there's sincerity there, I will even entertain it. Right. And that brings me to the biggest piece, which is like, what is fundamentally goddess culture about? Goddess culture is about sincerity primarily. Right? As long as you're fully showing up as who you are, who you fully are, no obfuscation of why you're here, no obfuscation of what you're truly experiencing and why you are sharing. I think that for me is the most dangerous part of the way that our internet culture communicates, is that it's all obfuscated. It's all this framework of like, am I joking or am I not joking? Can you take what I'm saying seriously, or is it, I'm just irony pilled? And I find that to be so destructive, so non-productive. And for me, I again, not to claim any sort of special knowledge, but I find that it hurts the goddess. I find that it actually hurts the goddess to stand and have to watch us not be able to connect with one another, not be able to find a space of listening and sharing in a way that lifts us all equally. Um, and the amount of people who claim some sort of special knowledge and then communicate that way, for me, is just so unacceptable and immediately betrays what's real, which is like, this is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. What you're saying is not of value. Not because you're not of value, not because you couldn't say something of value, but because you choose to say something that is denigrating others, or you choose to say something that is insincere in a way that cannot be counted on, insincere in a way that is utter cowardice, insincere in a way that is obfuscating your true intentions, that harms the shared trust, the shared safety, the shared space. And I find it to be unproductive. And the goddess culture is a productive culture. It is about creating together, right? We think the only type of production is like, how many reports did you finish this week? That's only productive within a certain system that's been agreed upon, that you're getting paid for. But again, I'll go back to this, like, goddess culture is fundamentally not professionalized. I'm not talking about your professional production. I'm talking about our cultural ability to be productive together, to look in the same direction, move in the same direction, to listen to what the other person has to say, to find the value there, and for all of us to move together like the herd animals we are. And, we are neither predator nor prey. We are both, right? Our eyes are not on the side of our heads, they are in the front of our heads. And so that does match some of our predatory components, right? But also we have a high level of communication is required in order for our culture to exist, because humans are not fully developed until we're in our mid-20s, which means up until then, we are dependent on those around us. Until our mid-20s, we are dependent on the environment around us to be conducive to our development, especially those first 5 years, and then the next 10 years after that, and then the following 10 years after that, right, are all stacked on top of itself. They're all stacked. We have this episodic view of reality. It's like, okay, well, you're 18, so now everything that came before and everything that comes after, there's like this split that unfolds. When in reality, that's a completely arbitrary number. And even the mid-20s is arbitrary for some, right? Because we will have, developmental differences on an individual basis. Of course, we can draw understanding from the generalized physiology of the human animal, the human organism, but our culture is very dependent on each other. Right now, especially, your food is utterly alienated from your life unless you work in food production. And if you work in food production, there are other parts, the tool creation, completely alienated from your personal skill set. And so we have this drastic hyper specialization that we think is hyper individualized, right? Like, I'm a hyper individual, when in reality everything is dependent on everything else. Everything is hyper connected, hyper interconnected. And that's where what we're learning from this globalized, technologized phase of our human animal development is actually really important for me as well, because I believe it was necessary to arrive in this time, in this place, in these lessons. I believe that these lessons are necessary for us to learn in order to properly integrate them into a larger view of humanity. Because now we can't help but acknowledge our dependence on an ecosystem. We can't help but acknowledge the interdependence that is present at all levels of our reality. And for me, that's such an exciting time, because that for me is really like where the goddess culture starts, from this place of utter interdependence. It's not independence, it's not dependence, it's interdependence. Alone together, strong individually, but dependent on everybody else's strength. No organism, no individual organism should be diminished, actually, through the idea of we are all dependent on everything and everyone else. I believe we then access the most important incentive, which is to protect and preserve each individual's sovereignty and also affirm their particular flourishing, their thriving. Um, I talked about this in a recent video, but, just talking about you fundamentally, each of us fundamentally, I've kind of lost my thought a little bit as I'm kind of feeling the space of something else that's actually coming completely out of left field, which was kind of one of my primary focuses, one of my primary relationships to goddess culture is it's these like 4 imperatives that work together, which is promoting and preserving individual sovereignty, affirming life in all its forms, being in service to the whole and being effective in all we do, in that, kind of fourfold relational truth, we can never denigrate somebody else. Because to denigrate somebody else is to stand in opposition to my own reality, which is my job is to affirm life in all its forms, in all of its representations. Is that life maybe not being allowed to flourish? Then my job is not to cast aspersions upon that organism. It's actually, if I'm really keeping my end of the bargain, I'm acting in service to that. My job is to act in service to that being that is not able to thrive, is not currently within its current conditions thriving. I don't say, man, that plant, what a goddamn freeloader. Here it is, drying out all on its own. Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go find some water, plant? No. I enter into relationship where I do acknowledge where are dependencies being built, but then where is a mutual sense of flourishing being built, right? I have plants in my house because I enjoy life around me, but also because it purifies the air. It engages with me just as I engage with it. There's responsibilities. There's mutual responsibilities to those things. I don't look at the plant and call it, a weakling for not being able to thrive in the conditions I put it in. I say, I have to provide the things it needs or else it won't be able to thrive. If it doesn't have the things it needs, how do I get it the things it needs? How do I give it the things it needs? And that for me is just so essential. That's so real. And so, yeah, goddess culture, this circular culture of sitting in the circle together with all human and non-human beings, so fucking important, so transformative of our individual as well as collective experiences of reality, I believe. And yeah, I wasn't expecting to talk about the diamond, the essential diamond truth of serve the whole, affirm life in all its forms, protect and promote individual sovereignty, and be effective in all that we undertake. That was channeled by a teacher of mine many years ago, and he has since kind of dropped that framework. But for me, that has really become one of my guiding principles. That has really guided my actions for the last almost 15 years now or so. And the way that self-perpetuating cyclical relationship to my own life, my own value set, all of that, I think is essential to what I'm now referring to as goddess culture. And yeah, unexpected in so many different ways. Really exciting stuff for me to be able to kind of begin to find my voice with, and just begin to share a little bit more about. I think for me, that's really where uh, this work is going. The Temple of the Goddess is really leading us to. And by us, I mean, me and anybody else who's along for the ride. Anyway, I think I'm going to cut it here because I feel myself I feel the energy dropping. I feel the need to say more kind of falling away. Really grateful. Want to, kind of, nobody watches this. This is just for me. Grateful to, the master's tools in this moment of YouTube for the opportunity it's allowed me to reflect further and to externalize a lot of what has come through from meditation or writing or journaling or one-on-one or group conversation, and just give it a space to go live for a little bit. And if somebody else is able to engage with it, amazing. And if not, amazing. And I'm grateful for the wind blowing and the sun shining and the snow and ice on the ground and the fact that trash still gets picked up. And my dog was hanging out with me. Anywho, have a beautiful day. Good luck out there. And may the goddess watch over us all.